We're all human. And it's important to know that doctors are people too. Doctors have emotions, they have passions in life and hobbies, and they enjoy participating as active members in the communities where they practice medicine. Doctors have families, friends, and relationships, while the latest in healthcare and the most current treatments for ailments will be topics on this Doctors Are People Too radio TV show. The focus will be in learning more about the interesting aspects in a physician's life and what they do away from the doctor's office or operating room table.
Hello and welcome, South Florida, to Doctors Are People Too here on iHeartRadio. We have a neuropsychologist on the program tonight, and that is so timely because tonight is Monday Night Football in the NFL. And, unfortunately, concussions are something that, are on the minds of everyone nowadays. It's kind of hit mainstream from what it used to be just a mention. But we're going to get to concussions in a second. But first, I want to introduce neuropsychologist Dr. Nicholoas DePrimia. Dr. DePrimia, thanks so much for making the drive all the way from West Palm Beach and being on Doctors Are People Too tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, David. Appreciate it.
And you are an experienced radio legend. We've had you on actually before. No, you did a great job. He was on Two Boys from Brooklyn show earlier this year right there at WBZT and 12:30 a.m. there in West Palm Beach. So he did a great job. So I wanted to have him on this show tonight. But we're going to get right into it because we have a lot to talk about. So in the news lately was famous legend basketball coach, college basketball coach, Pat Summitt. And we learned about 5 years ago that she had a diagnosis of early onset dementia. And that's kind of the first time I ever heard it. And I was thinking, wow, she's got all these wins. She's like 1,300 wins and the most all time in women's college basketball. I think college basketball, period, she has the most wins. And we were talking about this, Dr. DePrimia, but it was just kind of odd to me that she had been diagnosed, I think, at the age of 54 and then passed away at 59. So I want to ask you first, what exactly is dementia?
Mm-hmm. Well, dementia is a change in a person's brain functioning abilities, their thinking skills. It could be memory, it could be attention, language abilities. And typically this is something that progresses. It's a neurodegenerative disease process for most of them. Some can actually reverse, but for the majority of them, they tend to get worse over time. And there's many different types of dementia. And the term dementia means that there's a change in their brain functioning, and it's to such a degree that it begins to affect their abilities to do day-to-day tasks, take care of themselves.
And then one of the things that hit me kind of funny when I first saw the story was early onset dementia. So I'm thinking, man, that's a rare kind of dementia. I've never heard of that. So what is early onset dementia? And if you could explain it briefly.
Sure. Early onset dementia is less common, and essentially what it is it's an individual who's been diagnosed with dementia prior to the age of 65. So these individuals typically are in their 50s, sometimes earlier in their 30s or 40s, but typically in their 50s, as opposed to older individuals who are after the age of 65 who are first diagnosed with dementia.
So it's very rare to get it at an early age and say like the late 20s or 30s or 40s, but it is possible.
Yes, I mean there's been very rare cases of in the 20s, and even less, but it can happen in 40s and 50s, particularly for the early onset.
And I think as a member, still kind of the younger population, I'm barely in that still, but I'm almost over that. You can actually pass away from early onset dementia. Eventually, the ailments there, the symptoms can actually lead to death. Is that what happened?
Right. Well, with dementia and with Alzheimer's, they typically progress over time and advance to different regions of the brain to where thinking skills are affected, and eventually motor abilities are affected. Swallowing abilities can become affected. Patients may not be eating, and they become more compromised, and then you see sometimes patients die from other conditions like pneumonia. And the course of the disease can be anywhere from, a few years, like 4 to 5 years, but typically it's 8 to 10 to 12 years that patients may live with dementia, sometimes longer, but sometimes some of these dementias are more rapidly progressing.
And I think you made a great point there. Like, it's not just one thing, the memory loss, but it actually is swallowing, it's function, and a whole bunch of kind of all bunched together, which is the disease there that actually attacks the the person, the individual. Now, we've gone back and forth on this many times. I want you to explain what is Alzheimer's disease, and also, is it a form of dementia? Because I can't seem to circle my head around that. It's just like I keep on wanting to put them in two different categories, but what is Alzheimer's disease, and is it a form of dementia?
Right. That's a good question, David, and I think it's a common question lots of people have. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. There's several different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. And for Alzheimer's, the typical presentation is the rapid forgetting of information. That's the hallmark characteristic for Alzheimer's and how it affects the thinking abilities of the brain. And that come on slowly and gradually worsen. And unfortunately, even though there's more and more research being conducted, there's no cure.
Now, are you involved as a neuropsychologist? Do you involve yourself in any research, or is there any research being done locally that maybe you're involved with?
Presently, I'm not. I have in the past, and there are clinical studies going on in the area. So it's always good to know about them, and they are available. And the sooner people can be identified if they have Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, the earlier stage of Alzheimer's, perhaps, the better response they may have if they get involved in a clinical trial.
Now, I want to get in the signs and symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, but let me ask you, where is your office located? What organization are you with, and your phone number and website?
Sure. My office is in West Palm Beach, 927 45th Street, and it's Suite 304. It's on the campus of St. Mary's Medical Center. And I'm a part of Palm Beach Neuroscience Institute, which is under TFPS and Florida Physician Services. And the phone number for my office is 561-623-4980. And we're also at pbni.com.
There you go. Easy website to remember, pbni.com. So that's Dr. Nicholoas DePrima's address there, phone number, and website, which I'll mention a couple more times tonight. Now, you're actually a neuropsychologist and a licensed psychologist. Why do they combine those two together, and what does a neuropsychologist do?
Well, yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist. I have a doctorate in clinical psychology, so I'm a psychologist with specialized training in neuropsychology, which is a study of brain and behavior relationship, working with patients, evaluating and treating patients who have known or suspected brain dysfunction. But I am a psychologist by my formal education, which is different than a psychiatrist and a neurologist.
And I'm always so confused by the difference between the two. But you were telling me before we go on a few of the differences, and I know it has a lot to do with prescribing medicine. Obviously, they're two vastly different studies, medicine. But what's the main differences between a psychologist and psychiatrist?
Well, a psychiatrist has a medical degree and specialize in treating people, particularly from a medical perspective, or as a psychologist has a doctorate degree in clinical psychology or counseling psychology, and help patients from that perspective. Typically, psychologists do not prescribe medications, but actually there are some states that psychologists with more training have those prescription privileges. There are a few states that have that, and that may be more on the horizon. Not
Florida yet, though, right?
Not Florida yet.
Okay.
No. And I don't have that extra. It's a master's degree in psychopharmacology that is required, which I don't have.
I see. Well, thank you for explaining the difference, because for the longest period of time I've been so confused at those two. But I know other listeners have been too. But it is important that to know that Dr. DePrimia, He is a neuropsychologist. He evaluates and diagnoses dementia, stroke, traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. And we're going to get into all that. I do want to give out the number for listeners. If you have a question about the brain, we have the brain expert right here in the studio. It's 1-888-565-1470. So you can call in if you have a quick question. That'd be great. Let's get back a little bit to signs and symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. I know it's a gradual progression. It doesn't happen overnight, but what should family members, loved ones be looking for? I mean, what do you want to hear not what you want to hear as a physician, but what helps you, the signs and symptoms that you're hearing from family members and friends?
Well, it could be several different things, but I think the biggest part is just there's a change in somebody's thinking abilities that the individuals themselves or their loved one is becoming concerned about. A typical symptom is memory loss, forgetting names, forgetting conversations and information, repeating themselves, misplacing or losing things like, the phone, getting lost while driving, difficulties coming up with the words that they want to say. So those can be common signs and symptoms, as well as maybe some difficulties with day-to-day tasks. If somebody is having trouble managing their medications, they may forget a pill, or they may forget to pay their bills or double pay a bill. So starting to see those changes, could be the initial signs and symptoms of it. And either a loved one or the patient or individual may start to notice them.
And at that point, a family member or guardian gets the patient to the primary care, and then from that point, they are referred to a neuropsychologist. Is that how it works?
That's a typical referral that we have is from a primary care physician. But also patients, after they see their primary care, may see a neurologist who may conduct a comprehensive dementia workup, which involves a few different tests, including neuropsychological testing or neurocognitive testing. Sometimes patients may be referred from a psychiatrist or another psychologist. So there's a couple of different ways patients may find the office with these concerns.
And one last question about dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And on the other side, we're going to talk about traumatic brain injury, concussion, stroke, Parkinson's disease, and multiple sclerosis. If I can fit it all in, I'm going to try. But you have a huge areas of interest. So we have an amazing doctor on tonight. Let's talk about something I've seen in person recently is sundowning, and I did a little research on this, and this is in Alzheimer's disease and dementia patients. But one last question before the break: what is sundowning?
Sundowning can occur with particularly with older patients and patients with dementia may be at risk for it. Where later on in the day, in the nighttime hours, patients may become confused and disoriented and agitated, particularly if they're in a new environment like a hospital or a new facility, because as they become perhaps more fatigued throughout the day, their brain is compromised, or there can be other effects as well, whether it's medication, but typically it's older adults who may have dementia who start to experience this confusion at nighttime.
Well, thanks for explaining that. We're going to come right back with Dr. Nicholoas DePrimia from the Palm Beach Neuroscience Institute. Stay tuned on Doctors Are People Too.
I make a dinner for me and my girlfriend. We ate, we enjoyed. The dinner was very good. She was ready to go to sleep. I said, okay, I'm going to stay on the couch a little bit to watch TV. I started to feel something in my throat, like I was choking. And all of a sudden, I feel the pain, the sharp pain, like somebody put a knife in your back and open and do like this. That was when I called my girlfriend. I said, you have to take me to the hospital. I couldn't die. When they were doing the test, they saw something was weird. My valve was ripped. I said, God, please help me to get out of this. Dr. Bayo was on call. He was who performed my surgery. I described like an angel. I described like he was there to do that for me. My girlfriend, my son, he told me when they saw him getting out from the operation room, he was sweating. He was tired to be there for 10 hours. For me, it's unbelievable. I can walk, I can exercise a little bit, and I can drink red wine, that light red wine. Of course, 1 glass or 2 glasses. I see the life different, and I want to see my granddaughter to grow, and my son to get old. So I wanna live. I think that God gave me one more chance in life, and I had to take advantage of this.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DiPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And welcome back. We're live on Doctors Are People Too here with Dr. Nicholoas DePrimia, a neuropsychologist and licensed psychologist with the Palm Beach Neuroscience Institute at 927 45th Street, Suite 304, West Palm Beach, Florida. The area, zip code over there is 33407. It's actually right on the campus of St. Mary's Medical Center where Dr. DePrimia is on staff. And website is pbni.com, phone number 561-623-4980. So if you have a family member or loved one, or if you're a guardian looking to get the answers on dementia, stroke, traumatic brain injury, Parkinson's disease, or multiple sclerosis, those are Dr. DePrimia's areas of interest. Dr. DePrimia, we talked a lot about dementia and Alzheimer's disease at the beginning of the program. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about, first of all, what age range of patients do you treat? Because I know some medical practices treat a wide variety of children into adults, etc. But you're a very specific age range, so I'll let you describe it.
Well, I work with adult patients, mostly age 18 and above. As well, and into older age, patients that are in their 80s, 90s, and I've seen patients in their hundreds. But typically, I don't go much lower than 18, so it's adult patients.
That's a huge range, 18 to 100. So you actually have a couple 100-year-old patients?
I haven't had one in the past year, but I have had some in the office, and then if I see patients in the hospital. Sometimes, yeah. Well,
that's great to hear, though, because as the baby boomer population, my parents, and I'm sure yours as well, it'd be great to see them, hit 100. And we're talking about, age progression in a lot, and so you may see more of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we talked about dementia, we're seeing an increase with that as the population is aging and the baby boomers.
Oh, yeah, it's a huge population, especially down here in South Florida.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, I went to FAU Miami game over the weekend. It was actually a really good football game in the first half. University of Miami Hurricanes and FAU Owls. FAU is kind of a program that is kind of heading in the right direction, and Miami's kind of finding itself. And I was telling you before we went on, the hitting in that game at Hard Rock Stadium on Saturday night, I'd never seen anything like that, and I played a lot of football. And what I was telling you before we went on is these guys are from the same area of South Florida. Many of them were on the same teams. Some of them competed against each other, obviously, but then we got talking about traumatic brain injury. But there were a few on the field for a very long time, and they weren't holding their legs or knees. So I want to talk to you about concussion and traumatic brain injury. Now, I know traumatic brain injury can occur a whole different types of ways, and we're going to go into that in a second. But what is a traumatic brain injury, and is it the same as a concussion? Is that kind of like Alzheimer's disease and dementia, kind of in the same category?
Yes, actually, it kind of is, because concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury. It's a mild traumatic brain injury, but nevertheless, it is a traumatic brain injury. And with traumatic brain injuries, you can have a mild injury in severity, and or all the way to a severe traumatic brain injury, and it can involve any kind of event that where there's force onto the head that creates an injury to the brain, either structural damage or physiological change. And what happens is that sometimes there can be loss of consciousness or altered mental status. briefly in a concussion sometimes, and it can be, comatose for some patients who have had a more significant or severe traumatic brain injury.
So that like a car crash could be an example of a traumatic brain injury or concussion. Even falling. I know we have older population falling maybe from vertigo or even just, not steady and falling over, maybe an elderly patient that can be a traumatic brain injury as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the elderly are more at risk for brain injuries. We see higher rates for elderly and for younger people too, for children and that are more active.
Now, let me ask you your role in traumatic brain injury and concussion. Now, how is TBI is for short? How is it evaluated from a neurological standpoint? What's your role in helping a patient out?
Well, when I see patients who have had traumatic brain injuries, if it's in the office, let's say, I'll do a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation on them to assess their thinking abilities, their attention and their memory, and their language abilities, their executive skills, like their ability to solve problems and reason and make decisions, as well as emotionally. Depression, anxiety, behavioral changes can take place after a traumatic brain injury. So we complete these evaluations, paper and pencil tests and exams, and then come up with impressions and recommendations to help them understand what to expect with the recovery process and the severity of their injury, and hopefully make some good recommendations for them and their family members.
I think the key word there is evaluation. Tell me a little bit how that differs for stroke. Is it the same kind of neurological evaluation? Is it a little bit different?
Well, it's a similar neuropsychological evaluation if it's in the office. Again, we're completing objective tests, paper and pencil tests that are assessing these various thinking abilities and as well as assessing their emotional functioning. But it's that they're just two different types of both acquired brain injuries. They're different. So it's important to understand what the recovery process will be like with somebody who's had a stroke versus somebody who's had a brain injury, and how it can affect them differently behaviorally too.
And you said office, and your office, this is Dr. Nicholoas DePrimia on Doctors Are People Too with us. Your office is at 927 45th Street, Suite 304, West Palm Beach, there on the campus of St. Mary's Medical Center. Website for Dr. DePrimia is pbni.com. Easiest URL ever. 561-623-4980. Dr. DePrimia is a neuropsychologist and licensed psychologist. Doctor, I'm throwing a lot at you quickly, but you're really answering quickly as well, which is great. So we're getting to tackle a lot of topics. What about Parkinson's disease? How can a neuropsychologist help?
Well, as with brain injury and stroke, Parkinson's patients may experience cognitive changes. It can be mild changes with, and there's some patterns that are typical for different types of patients. Some Parkinson's patients may have some common cognitive changes with their attention and their executive skills. They may have some memory difficulties. It may be mild early on. Parkinson's is a progressive disease, so as it advances, sometimes these mild cognitive difficulties, as well as emotional, like we talked about with depression, is not uncommon with Parkinson's patients, or behavioral changes. As the disease progresses, though, they may become more severe, and sometimes we see there may be a patient that has Parkinson's related dementia, to where it's affecting their abilities to function day to day and complete tasks.
Now, you also can help out with multiple sclerosis and evaluating and helping the neurologist team make the diagnosis. I've actually had a multiple sclerosis test done because I was on a TV show once and I had a doctor show me some of the ways they test for it. But briefly, if you could just explain how you can help from multiple sclerosis as well.
And there are some patients with MS who do experience cognitive changes in several different areas, and it may be mild and it may be more significant. And with MS patients, depression can be a role too. And when individuals have some cognitive difficulties, and as well as having depression or anxiety, these emotional difficulties can make these cognitive deficits even worse. And with MS patients, it's important to understand too that a lot of them experience fatigue, which can make their cognitive symptoms worse. So, we will evaluate to see how their brains are functioning and performing, and again, try to make some recommendations to help manage these symptoms, both cognitively and emotionally.
Dr. DePrimia, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It's hard to believe that we ripped through the whole interview like that, but we got through everything we wanted to talk about, so I'm happy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
And I really appreciate you going into length about everything. That's Dr. Nicholoas DePrimia, pbni.com, 561-623-4980. He's located at 927 45th Street, Suite 304 there in West Palm Beach, and he's on staff at St. Mary's Medical Center. Thanks again.
My pleasure, David. Thank you for having me.
My dad is a cardiologist, and so I have two brothers, and we're all equally painful to my mom. And so to get us out of the hospital, we would go on rounds with him on Saturdays and Sundays in the hospital back in Oklahoma City. And we used to, race wheelchairs down the hallways from the time I was about 6 years old. When I was a freshman in high school, I got to watch my